Welcome to the Retiring Well podcast. My name is Charlie Jordan. I'm your host, and I am so glad you joined me today. Our mission here at Retiring Well is simple. We want to help you do just that, to retire well. We're going to look at more than just the money and examine multiple aspects of life and retirement and how your wealth can be used to improve your life and the life of others. This is Retiring Well. Hey everyone, it's Charlie. I am really happy that you are joining us today because this is a special episode. Not only is it the next iteration of our Retiring Well book club, where we take a look at the book From Strength to Strength by Arthur Brooks, but to do so with me is my CEO, partner, and friend, Ray Padron. And I'm just really excited for you to hear from Ray. We use the book review as a bit of a catalyst to talk about life and career progression and moving into sort of a second phase. And Ray really just shares his heart in this episode. I know that you will enjoy this time and get something from Ray's experiences. So I really hope that you enjoy this episode with Ray Padron. Well, Ray, I am so happy you have joined me on the Retiring Well podcast. It's good to have you.
Charlie, it is great to be here. I always enjoy spending time together, no matter what.
Absolutely. You know, I read this book, From Strength to Strength by Arthur Brooks, and there's two thoughts that I had. One was, there's a lot of clients that could really use this. This is a great book. And I immediately thought, Ray should read this as well, because you and I have swapped books many times and just, know your heart, know your history, and thought this would be a perfect book for you and I to read together. And then I thought, wow, it'd be perfect to have you on the podcast to kind of talk about your thoughts on it.
Yeah, and I greatly appreciate the fact that you recommended the book. As I read it, it just kept coming to me, wow, this is exactly where I am and what I'm going through in my own life. So it was very timely.
So when you think about your journey and where you've kind of come from, just give a little bit of a background for the people listening on sort of, how long you've been in this business, what your kind of career shape has looked like.
Sure. Well, my career started what it was then, Big 8 public accounting, and now Big 4 public accounting, last time I counted. And kind of an eclectic career path. I worked in corporate America. I spent some time doing venture capital. And then I started my own little firm where I was effectively doing sort of, I would call, part-time CFO work for a bunch of small companies up in the Washington, D.C. area. And that led to a conversation I had with one of my clients who suggested that I actually get into financial planning, that my skill set in working with business owners was one that would lend itself to that. And my career really started from there when I started working for another large firm and opened up the Washington, D.C. office of a wealth planning firm. And in 2004, I had the opportunity to move over to what's now CI Brightworth, and the rest is history. So it's almost been 30 some odd years of doing wealth planning for clients. And I'm 66 now, so I was 36 years old when I started in the business, and here I am.
That's awesome. Well, I'm not going to make you brag on yourself, but I will say you've had a storied career, you've been highly successful, and that's really what this book is really addressing, is this idea of success and how it changes over time. And I couldn't help but just be struck right off the bat from this book on the intro. He gives sort of an example of this guy he sees on the plane, and he's just really struggling. And he doesn't name this person, but he knows this person is a highly successful person, maybe the tops in their field, and they are basically just despondent with life in many ways. They've had success, and now they don't really know what to do with it. And he goes in to call this the striver. And I think many of us can relate to that. I'm sure many of the people listening to this can fully relate to being the striver, seeking excellence in everything that you do. And we're kind of built to do that, right?
Exactly. And most of our clients are built to do that. They've been successful, and they continue to strive. And part of the journey is to, and the point of the book is to help us think, very intentionally about how to make the shift from that corporate striver or business owner, whatever the case may be, to having a different feedback loop, I would call it. How do we view success? How do we view satisfaction in life? And how do we make that shift to the next phase? It's not dissimilar to the S curve that you learn at grad school or in college. Corporations go through what are called an S curve, and this is the same exact thing. It's a personal S curve, and you start to plateau as you reach the peak of your success and your impact, and as you're moving out of running a business, in my case, you're looking for, okay, what is the next S curve? It is not the last S curve.
Right.
And the book does a great job of addressing some of the things you need to be thinking about, the skills you want to build in order to make that a successful transition.
The book really hits home for most people. You're 66, I'm 44. We're obviously in different places, but I'm really starting to relate to what I'm reading here, because when you're talking about that first curve, it's really physical in many ways. It's just the physical limitations of our bodies and our brains that change over time, and what we're really good at. And he actually talks about this striver's curse, which is eventually you find inevitable decline terrifying. Your success is increasingly unsatisfying and infrequent, and your relationships lacking. And you start to see that what worked for you before isn't what works for you now. Right. And you're starting to realize that the strategy of just work harder, keep going, do that much more to make up for what you feel is maybe a decline. Maybe you're not even recognizing it, but that just leads to so much pain and exhaustion and burnout. And we see that. We've talked about that a lot in Retiring Well, with this idea that people are they're at the end. They're tired. They've worked so hard. And as Brooks points out very clearly in the first chapter, your cognitive decline is coming.
It is coming, absolutely. And he talks about two types of intelligence, right? You have what's called fluid intelligence and then crystallized intelligence. Fluid intelligence is what gets you on that first S curve. It's what allowed us to become very successful. It's because you're running a whole practice area here at CI Brightworth. But that's not what gets you to the next place. And that's where your crystallized intelligence comes in. And frankly, crystallized intelligence is nothing more taking everything you've learned through life, wisdom, and applying it in a different way. And that's where the shift needs to take place. As I reflect on that, I've actually have been very blessed, because one of the things I learned about myself and that I enjoyed in not just running Brightworth, but really just being in the business, is I'm an encourager, I'm an influencer. That's sort of my personality design, and I enjoy developing people. So I learned very quickly that what gave me a lot of satisfaction in business is also very translatable to what's going to give me a lot of satisfaction after I leave the firm.
Yeah, when I was reading about the fluid intelligence versus crystallized, the fluid is that it really has a lot to do with speed.
Exactly.
And you're able to just process quickly. And they say that actually peaks at the end of your 30s.
Yeah, I found that hard to believe, but apparently it's true. There's a lot of science behind it.
Yeah, I think there's sort of the wise old sage that can do the job really well in many cases. But you think about the fluid intelligence, it's just pure processing power. The bad news is that does decline over time. The good news on crystallized is that increases over time, because it is the accumulation of the wisdom that you receive.
Right. It actually doesn't peak until you're, well into retirement, like it's in your late 70s, 80s, before even that starts to decline, that crystallized intelligence. So there's, and that's why people in my position, or let's just say after they've retired, they spend time doing things to help others, right? You're spending more time giving back. You're spending more time coaching and mentoring other individuals. And they're also sitting on boards. That's one of the reasons why a lot of very senior executives sit on boards, is because they're not there to figure out the details. They're there to think through the strategy. And there's just a lot of wisdom, around how those things should be approached.
So this really is sort of a good news and bad news book when you read it, because he starts out kind of hitting everyone between the eyes and say, hey, you're getting older, you're declining, and you know it, and you felt it for years and maybe didn't know how to put a finger on it.
Right.
But there's this second curve, and that's where he's talking about the strength to strength. So going from one strength to another. So we'll focus most of our time on that second strength, since most people don't want to talk about the first. But I think the important point he makes to begin with is that recognizing that there's this reality that we all have to face. Exactly. It doesn't have to be a negative. It can be a very positive once you understand there's a second curve that you can get to, another strength that you can develop. There's a way that you can have a whole lot more satisfaction than what you're doing now when you're struggling to make sure you keep up with the old strength.
Right.
That
and he's actually really careful. I thought one of the great points of the book is, put it simply, less is more. And that you don't want to put yourself into a second striving effort, that you want to actually, don't have the 25 bucket list items, right? That you want to actually have a few at a time. And that how you calculate satisfaction isn't, I want more, I get more, I want more, I get more. It's actually managing through that and investing in the things that actually bring more richness to your life. And I think that's something I'm really looking for. One of the things that he talks about, and I really related to this, one, because it's like I'm facing this at so many dimensions in my life. Where do we want to retire? Who are our friends? Like, I'm going to be stepping away from work friends. Who are going to be our long-term friends? Where do we go to church? How do we invest in our children and our grandchildren, where they live? There's just a lot of moving parts. And he uses the metaphor of what's called the falling tide. He uses an example. It's a great example, talking to a fisherman. Basically, if you're fishing off the shore, off the beach, you can't catch fish in a rising tide. No matter what you do, there's very little you're going to be able to catch. But if you're in a falling tide, that's when everything's getting churned up, everything's changing, and the only mistake you can make, and I love this line in the book, the only mistake you can make is not having your line in the water. And that's the point, I think, which is, everything is changing very rapidly for Sharon and I, and it's a good thing. It's actually really exciting. And I think I've been blessed with having the tool set and the inclination to be able to make that shift, I think, pretty well. But it is unnerving.
We talk a little bit in Retiring Well about this shift and this change, and we talk about the transition, and one of the symbols for that transition I have is kind of this ray of sunshine coming out over the cloud, but also a storm cloud at the same time. It's kind of like you're seeing the light out here, what could be and what can be, and you're also going through just this little upheaval of what's always been the case, and whether that's, I'm transitioning from working to not working, from, being just a parent to a grandparent. That's a major shift.
Yep.
There's just all these things happening. And what I thought this book really does is help people to think about what really matters to them. And that's actually the mission of our firm.
What matters most.
That's right. And as you've kind of processed this, it's probably been for you, I know it's been probably a decade conversation, just thinking about this transition. How have you been able to process what matters most to you? What does that process look like for you?
Well, that's a really good question. And I think most people, I'd like to think, as we get older and mature, the things that we thought were going to bring meaning to our life and success, whether that's wealth, however you want to look at it, changes. And, luckily I've done very, very well from the wealth side, But that was just an outcome. That was not something I was actually pursuing. Clearly pursuing it in my 20s. Right? I think I've shared with you I wanted to be a millionaire before I was 30 years old. That was clearly my goal. I remember having that ingrained in my head, and that was all my striving at that time. But as you matured, the things that matter most, obviously, your family matters an awful lot. My marriage, my faith matters an awful lot. How I leave Brightworth, CI Brightworth, really means a lot to me. But that's not about me. That's about the people that I've been investing in over the last 20 years. So now the question is, where am I going to find that feedback and to be able to invest in the future? So that's something that I've been dealing with for a long time. You know that I had back surgery and a couple other physical issues this last year, which has really done nothing more than accelerate my thinking around all of this. In that first chapter when he says, get over it, you're declining, right? So I've got it. I had it like slapped in my face this year. But it's all for a really good end, and I think I have the tools to be able to make that transition. The other thing I'd say, Charlie, is I actually did hire a coach, and one of my concerns about my transition was, can I really, can I land the plane slowly? In other words, can I really do a glide path approach to stepping out of running the firm? And what I found was a surprise in many ways. It was worth going through that entire process. I'm an all or none. I'm a striver, right? I'm an all or none kind of guy, and I'm not really good at 50% or 25%. And one of the things I found out was, no, you actually can do it, and you just need to be intentional and do the blocking and tackling. And so I've been actually working on that, and that's part of how I've managed my delegation here at the firm, so that I can free up more time for me to think about the transition we're going through with CI Private Wealth, and also to be able to spend more time with my family and kids and invest the things that are going to matter most in the next phase.
You know, I've been able to watch that firsthand, and transitions are not quick. They're not easy. They can be messy. We were on management teams together this entire time, and we would say, Ray, let us take some of that off your plate. And you'd say, that's great, guys. And then we'd do that, and then, yeah, I'm not ready for that part. And that's part of the process that we got to watch you go through. Right. And I would say that we've seen that happen. We've seen you just invest in the second generation of the firm and this leadership, and that's a process that just overlapped for many years. And I think it's a testament to you recognizing what you need to make sure you're doing, because you could have just kept doing what you're doing. And as the book points out many times, that just leads to the wipeout, right? It just leads to just finally hitting a wall. And I'm sure many people listening to this have probably hit that wall before. But that overlap of, relying on the strengths that, you used to get you where you wanted to go, to really what for you was developing people and investing in people, and investing in the next generation, and watching sort of that, dare I say, legacy kind of, creep in. You've had an impact on my life. You've had an impact on others in the firm. And I think that's ultimately what has brought you a lot of professional satisfaction from my standpoint.
Absolutely has. I have said, as we've made this transition to CI Brightworth and CI Private Wealth, that the most significant gift, if I may, that I have brought to CI Private Wealth is the team. It really is the legacy, and I'm really proud of that. Like the strength of the firm. Yes, it's in the client relationships. It's in our professionalism. It is in how we do things. No question about it. But we have a very broad and deep leadership here at Brightworth, and other firms who are in CI Private Wealth have noticed it. So for that, I'm very ecstatic.
So as you were going through this book, what are some of the things that kind of just really maybe caught you off guard or surprised you and made you think really hard about what the next chapter looks like?
There were a few things. There's some really, one of the things I really liked the book is that the way he wrote it, actually, and the way he laid it out. Some of the things I think were pretty obvious. Wisdom, applying your wisdom, giving back, mentoring and coaching are things that, and by the way, that's been around for several thousand years, right? Cicero wrote it about it in a book. I think it's certainly now a book because I have it on my bookshelf called A Life Well Spent. Those are things that, we would expect we would want to do. I certainly would want to do. But the things that surprised me were, one was become friends with thinking about your death. That was just like, okay, I get the...
That's not what everyone wants to do all the time.
No, not at all. And one of his points is you take the sting of the thoughts of death away by actually just giving it a lot more contemplation. But the point is really not to become morbid about it. The point is to get you to be more intentional in the present, right? If you think about your eulogy resume, right, instead of your professional resume, it's the classic, what do you want people to say about you at your eulogy? So if you're thinking about that on a more regular basis, it causes you to go, okay, where am I spending my time this week? And is that really what's, best for my life? One of the things that I've struggled with over the last 10 years is this conversation around happiness versus meaning. And I think one of the struggles that I've had is I've worked really hard to do things that were meaningful. And they're not binary. It's not meaningful versus happiness, that you can actually do both. And I need to work on doing more of the things that bring happiness and not necessarily have to do things that are hard. So what brings meaning going forward should be a little bit different than what brings meaning over the last 25 years.
It strikes me in that conversation that early in your career, that would almost be seen as almost like a cop-out. Like, I want to be happy,
exactly,
but not successful or not significant or whatever it might be. And we're all trying to either be known or, there's that whole line of, would you rather be rich or would you rather be famous?
Exactly.
There's a lot of people who love to be known and want to be known and want to be significant. And maybe people get to the end of their career and maybe they look at it as a bit of a disappointment because they may not have reached that level of notoriety or gotten the same applause that they thought they should have had or wanted to have when they were dreaming about what their career success was going to look like. And I think what this book does in many ways is it gives a lot of hope to that next chapter being even more fulfilling than that first chapter was, which was about success and achievement and kind of winning the prize.
Exactly.
And then realizing, okay, well, now what? And there's a lot of people, when I think about our audience for Retiring Well, that are asking the now what question. How do I move to the next phase? All I know is how to be successful in this one thing, and I've worked my rear end off to get there.
Yep.
Now what? As you're processing this for yourself, how would you kind of coach people along in this now what question? How do you start to get there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I feel really lucky in that regard. So when I think about others, he uses this expression, what's your marshmallow? And if you recall, there was the studies done years ago where they put a marshmallow in front of a couple of kids and say, I'm going to leave the room. And if you don't eat your marshmallow, I'll have another one for you. And half the kids eat the marshmallow and the other halves don't. Most of our clients were people who didn't eat the marshmallow. They learned deferred gratification. So they learned to give up something to get what they wanted, right? And it doesn't change on the second S curve. So you have to decide what are the things you are going to give up. But the hard part is figuring out what's your marshmallow. And that's where I've spent the time over the last 5 years getting a coach, thinking about it, and working on doing certain things, whether it's being on boards or investing in some other companies, that have moved me in that direction already as I have time. And for others, I think it's a matter of sitting down, look at your skill set, if you want to use the Venn diagram approach of, how can I use the wisdom I've obtained over the last, 40 years of work and apply it to this next stage in life? Where do I give back? Where can I spend time with other individuals? So one of the areas that I know that I want to work on and be more intentional about is in the area of friendship. He uses the expression, nurture your aspen grove. Now, I happen to have camped in an aspen grove with the Boy Scouts one year, and it's pretty overwhelming when you do it. It's just absolutely a thing of beauty, and you just see how rich that area where the aspens grow is. But, I have a lot of friends, but a lot of them are work friends. And the question will become, and you and I will one day make that decision together, or one of us will make it, which is, what do we want the post Brightworth relationship to look like? I am a big fan of having relationships that are very reciprocal. Those are the ones that tend to work the best, and which means you need to spend time, you need to be thoughtful about it, you need to engage, and I want to be, that's an area I definitely know I'm going to want to work on. There's a cute quote that I believe his son asks him in the book, Arthur Brooks, his son, do you have deal friends or do you have real friends? And I feel like a lot of my work friends are real friends, but you really don't know until you're not working together.
I think that's an area that people are often surprised about when they enter into retirement, is how many of their relationships and their social capital was at work.
Correct.
And how many of those dramatically change after that. I mean, I think it's just probably human nature that, when you're not around each other and everything else. I remember when I graduated high school, we all said, we're going to be together forever. And some of those people I haven't seen since that day.
Exactly.
But that's an area that's becoming an increasing focus as retirement itself gets older. People are realizing that social isolation, the lack of connected relationships outside of your spouse, are one of the big drivers of dissatisfaction in retirement, because you don't have that outlet. You don't have that same relational capital that you're building. And as a result, some people just get lonely and they go inward. That's where they sit in front of the TV and watch cable news every 30 minutes and really get mad at the world. And so one of the things we're trying to do in Retiring Well is talk a lot about this social aspect of your life, this element of your life, that what are you doing to prepare for this?
Exactly. So I've been blessed with having taken a business relationship, specifically Dave Pulster, one of the founders of the firm, along with Chris Dardeman. And that is now a real friendship. We have a friendship outside of the firm. Granted, there's an awful lot of context with the firm that we talk about, but we know we're also going to be friends outside of working at Brightworth. I'd like to see more of that. I do think that there's a tremendous amount of science, and he does bring it up in the book. Some of these studies, by the way, around relationships and the importance of relationships are literally decades and decades old. They have tracked people that are now in their 90s since they left college. And the one common denominator, the most important thing to happiness in retirement, is relationships. And we shouldn't be surprised. If you think about how the world works, the world really works on relationships. And so, anyways, if there's one area I know I need to spend a little bit more time being intentional is, okay, who are my relationships going to be, and what can I do to nurture those into the future?
Are there any other just takeaways from this book that you just felt, man, this is powerful for me, and I know will be something that I would recommend to others as they pick this book up?
Well, I think the book, again, I highly recommend it to anybody who's in their 50s. The order in which it's written, how he walks you through it, really motivates you, and it's incredibly practical.
Yeah, and I would even expand it. I would say those in their 40s are surprisingly going to get a lot out of this. It is not just for someone who's contemplating a retirement in the nearer term. It was actually very enlightening to me and gave me a lot of validation for what I was just feeling and wrestling with my own career. I'm not the technician I once was.
Right.
My role is different. Where I get satisfaction in my professional life is very different than it once was. And I'm sensing that. And to have someone kind of put a fine tip on it like that was very helpful. And I would even expand it to someone that is well into their 60s, maybe even well into retirement already, that maybe is struggling because
Sure.
they're thinking more about what used to be than what is possible in front of them.
Charlie, you're making a really good point. And I would say that you and I are in a business that really lends itself to realizing this. And it's not just because we get to watch so many people go through it, but we're in a business of giving counsel and having wonderful relationships with our clients. And as we mature from being the technician, we realize, I bring more value to my client's life by not being the great technician, but knowing enough to bring wisdom to the conversation. And our clients just absolutely love that. They want to know the technicians back there, and that's why we have, wealth planners here. But it lends ourselves to being able to make this transition, frankly. Now, take a business owner who's built this very complex business, and it's grown, and then they sell it. That's a different transition, and they need to start earlier. I think you're absolutely right. But I'll suspect that when you become my age, you will be well on your way to having figured out the second S-curve.
Well, I sure hope so. And I would just say, Ray, it's been a pleasure talking to you about this book. We're going to be having many more conversations on this podcast. So anyone listening, you're going to get Ray again. His wisdom is something that I've certainly have benefited from over the years for sure, and proud to call him a partner and a friend. So Ray, thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlie. Great to be here.
It is really important to recognize that your individual situation is unique to you, and anything we discuss today should not be considered legal, tax, or investment advice. But you may have heard this podcast and have questions or want to talk to someone about your personal situation. We have ways you can connect with our team. If you'd like to connect with an advisor or have any questions for us to answer here on the podcast in a future listener question episode, you can shoot us an email at retiringwell@brightworth.com. Also, one of my favorite things we offer is the Retiring Well Connection. It's a monthly email newsletter. It covers all areas of life and retirement, both the money side and the personal side. And we search for great content all over the web, pull together 3 to 4 pieces each month, whether that's a podcast, article, book recommendation, etc. Pull together things that we think our readers and our listeners will find interesting and valuable. So there's a link to subscribe to that in the show notes. So make sure you get your Retire Well connection each month. And finally, you're going to hear us reference the elements of retirement frequently around here. We've developed a tool to help you think through what matters most to you in life, in retirement, and where you can prioritize your financial decision-making to retire well. So to get your copy of what we call the 10 Elements of Retirement Self-Assessment, see the link in the show notes. If you enjoyed this podcast, please help us by rating and subscribing so you don't miss any future episodes. That's all for us today. I'm Charlie Jordan. Have a great day.